is now brought to order on Thursday, August 31st, 2017 at 6 p.m. On behalf of the Board of Education, I would like to welcome everyone. Your attendance this evening reflects your interest in local education and is greatly appreciated. At this time, we'll start with 167.18, Pledge of Allegiance of the Flag. Don, I was going to call on you. Tob, you can start us.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 168.18, roll call of attendance. Ms. Hines.
Mr. Cox.
I am present.
Mr. Buckaloo.
Here.
Dr. Weaver.
Here.
Ms. Hines present. Ms. Madison. Ms. Madell.
I'm here.
Ms. Walker.
Present.
Let the record show 7-0.
Thank you. Item number 169.18, citizen comments on agenda items only. Okay, seeing none. We have item number 170.18, education entity master signatory. So effective tomorrow, September 1st, 2017, we need to have approved signatory for the education entity master. The administration recommends Deputy Superintendent, Mr. James Larson Schuyler, to function in the capacity until our new superintendent is officially seated. So basically, that's just for him to sign documents, and he's already kind of doing that because he's in the finance department. So at this time, I'll take a motion.
Second.
Okay. Moved by Dr. Weaver, supported by Mrs. Madison. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Madell.
Yes.
Mr. Cox.
Yes.
Mr. Buckaloo.
Yes.
Dr. Weaver.
Yes.
Ms. Hines, yes. Ms. Madison. Ms. Walker.
Yes.
Let the record show 7-0.
Thank you. Motion carries. Item number 171.18, superintendent search and selection process. Again, welcome everyone. We are on the second interview part of the superintendent search. We have 2 candidates this evening. And we'll do just like we did before. Dr. Davis will facilitate with the questions, but this time it'll be a little bit more interactive because this is the second interview and we're going to get down into the nitty gritty of it. So at this time, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Marlene Davis.
Thank you, John.
Is this the one we saw on Monday?
What's that?
Is this the one we saw on Monday?
No.
No, different? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Albrecht.
A lot different.
Thanks.
Okay.
So, I think I'm on. Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. As President Walker indicated, the nature of this interview will be obviously questions and answers, but because some of the questions will be quite tailored to John and some will be tailored to the other candidates, most of the questions are the same for both candidates. But this is an opportunity for the board to ask follow-up questions, and we're going to try and make this as interactive as possible, given the nature of an interview. So I'm going to use this handheld, and I might get up from time to time because as you're talking, I want to include you in the facilitation, and it's kind of awkward to do it from this little hole of a chair. So, John. As you and I indicated, one of the first things that the board was interested in hearing from you is what is your 90-day thought for your entrance into the district as a superintendent. And so I'm going to turn it over to you now, and you can share with the board what would it be like if you were the superintendent in the first 90 days.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, members of the Board of Education, members in the audience. Thank you for being here tonight. My 90-day plan might look a little bit different than any other candidate, simply because we're entering into a time where we have to implement the first stages of a strategic plan, and that's all going to be happening at the same exact time. So the title is Maintaining Focus, Implementation of the Strategic Plan while leadership in the district changes. That transition plan is going to look a lot different, besides the fact that I'm going to have to spend a significant amount of my time early making connections with families, students, district stakeholders, state and local officials, as well as service groups. I'm going to have to be deeply involved in the strategic planning process, specifically the choices work that's going to go on related to our school configuration. I'm going to do this in phases. Those phases are acclimation to the role of superintendent and garnering understanding from various people, implementation and oversight of our strategic plan, development of relationships with state and local officials and local community groups, and talking about leadership structure for our school district. The first familiarity with the organization is the organizational chart, and I'm actually going to show you my particular view of what a school district's organizational chart ought to look like, because this actually plays into how I'll do that work in the first several weeks of making contact with people across the district. So you'll notice in your handout that my depiction of an organizational chart is an upside down pyramid. And a typical organizational chart is a pyramid shape with some sort of central office leader at the top and the people that do all the work at the bottom. But in a school district, it's a little bit different, because the focus has to be on the teaching and learning that happens in classrooms, and they're the people doing all the work, and there's the greatest number of our employees. So they're at the top, and so the superintendent's at the bottom of this pyramid, and it's intended to look that way in a point like that because it's precariously balanced, and it takes an awful lot of people doing a lot of things to make sure that we can attain our mission. You'll notice the people in that depiction being in the background. That's the Board of Education, community stakeholders, parents, guardians, those kind of people that we need to support us in our work, and they're part of that organizational chart. It's going to be very important, if our focus is on teaching and learning, that I spend a little bit of time looking at test scores and student outcomes in the first 90 days to make sure that I'm aware of where we're at and where our concerns might be, so they can be addressed early. Going on, so phase one, I've got to hit the ground listening, and I probably want to avoid any real change initiatives for the immediate future. I think it would be inappropriate to come in as superintendent and maybe start moving furniture around or take the pop machine out of the teacher's lounge or do something like that. There's far more important things to do as I become acclimated with the people across the district. I'm going to be spending probably upwards of 2 hours at every one of our facilities meeting with custodians, teachers, administrators, other support staff, getting a sense of what it is that's on their minds, asking them what's working, what's not working, what would they like to see done in the near future, because that's going to impact how I lead. I want to be collaborative. I want to hear what people have to say. So I probably will schedule a series of meetings, and I will, but the number might vary depending on how much time I have. But I want to meet with parents and community stakeholders, and I'm guessing that'll probably take anywhere from 5 to 6 meetings, with some of them during the day and some in the evening, to make them available to other people so that they could go. Continuing on with phase one, I'll be seeking feedback and input from central office personnel as well. That would be all the clerical staff and the central office administrators during the same early 2 to 3 weeks. I want to meet with each central office administrator and get a sense of their individual aspirations and ideas as to our challenges that will be faced as we implement our strategic plan. I want to consider the current leadership structure and seek input from staff across the district. This is going to be challenging at first, and the reason that I say that, there's going to be an awful lot of work for the new superintendent to do in leading educational services, and the instructional plan will be difficult from the superintendent's position when there's that kind of work that has to be done across the district. So along with district leadership, I need to become fully familiar with two other components of the strategic plan, which are the areas related to attracting and retaining quality staff and the choice work related to configuration and facility utilization. That'll happen in the 4th and 5th weeks. And I'm going to actually read this because I want to make sure that I'm clear on it. The district's applied for a TSL grant. That's a Teacher and School Leadership Incentive Program. And we're waiting for that notification. The grant has provisions for leadership development through ladders and lattices with the objectives of developing human capital management systems and providing performance-based compensation systems. The funds will be utilized as incentives for district employees who seek to develop as school leaders. The grant provides for the superintendent to act as a project manager, and 50% of the salary of the superintendent is paid by those grant funds should we be successful. We expect to hear on that as early as September 30th, and work on that has to happen right away. So that's going to happen in the first 90 days of the new superintendent's work. And then included in the work for implementation of the strategic plan is planning for that choice work that I spoke of that has to happen during the months of October and November so that we can make a decision about district configuration in early December. We will be discussing plans for contracted service to support that choice work. In fact, we began that process today, talking with John Silveri, who led the strategic plan work. He facilitated the strategic plan work for us. That worked very well, but we have to continue to plan that process with him. We have found that our community stakeholders and our staff feel much more free to speak openly if district administration is not there and someone else is facilitating that work. So we think that's important. Going to phase 2, we actually have to begin the work to establish stakeholder groups for choice work. We have to begin that early October and connect with various groups related to that work. We have to include district staff and administrators as well as parents, students, business leaders, elected officials. We need to go through some exercise that allows for public and staff weigh-in on best practice for school configuration. In weeks 7 and 8, I will have to revisit the instructional plan implementation and arrange for a cadence of accountability because I won't be intimately involved in that work anymore. I'm going to have to arrange for the educational services group to report to me regularly as to the efforts completing the framework for personalized learning with Modern Teacher. That work has to parallel the configuration choice work because the instructional plan will be integrated into the configuration once we decide what it is. Phases 3 and 4 is working relationships with state and local officials and local service organizations. Of course, I include the Board of Education. We'll be interacting quite a bit in the first 6 weeks anyway, but later on, developing further relationships with our state representatives and senators as well as local officials. I want to make a point here. I think it's very, very important that we not forget, and I won't forget, our brothers and sisters and family in Canton, Romulus, and Inkster, and especially Inkster. They've been disenfranchised by the state, and we need to find a way to reach out and help them in this process and make them integral members of our group. Phase 5 will be assess current cabinet structure, and this will happen in weeks 7 through 12. I want to take a really hard look at the purpose and function of the superintendent's cabinet. I'm going to ask the group to have some conversation about what the representation in the district should be departmentally or other representatives. There are people, we do have principals from elementary schools and high schools, one from each. They don't represent their bargaining unit as such, but they come to us in the role that they can give us some insight and feel for how their schools might be impacted by decisions we make. Well, with that being said, there's a lot of layers of other communication that take place in the district. Certainly, it would be wise to consider having other members from other groups there, because a teacher, for instance, because they give us a feel for how the work we do relates to teachers in the classroom and that kind of thing. So that's going to be an important part. Number 3 on the list is AROI. That stands for Academic Return on Investment. We're in the middle of learning how to do that work. It goes along with program evaluation, and we're going to spend some time during those the 7th through 12th week talking about the structure of cabinet so that we can address that appropriately. We want cabinet to be problem solving, so if we're going to include, and collaborative, if we're going to include other stakeholders that haven't been in the past, it has to be open and collaborative. So the superintendent facilitates the work, but we have to make sure that people have voice if they're at the table. Next steps, end of November, that's when we'll be making a tentative configuration decision. So what grade levels will we have? Will we have kindergarten through 8th grade schools, kindergarten through 6th grade schools? What will our configuration look like? We're going to, at that point, begin the process of facility evaluation and utilization, which is taking a really good look at our buildings and say which ones will support our configuration. At that point, we'll develop a utilization report and convene a study group to consider that report for its effectiveness. And finally, we have to develop an appropriate cadence of accountability in making sure that we're reporting as the board our progress. And so I would be asking this group, how often would you like to, and in what manner would you like to receive reports related to moving the strategic plan forward. And then finally, in December, I would present a 90-day report about the success of the first 90 days of my superintendency. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for John about his 90-day report? I'm going to slide over here to the center where I can sit down and see all y'all. If you don't, then we'll go with the first question. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Mr. Albrecht, on your next to last step, next step's end of November, you're talking about doing a configuration plan, and I got the impression that you were thinking about doing that prior to deciding on the question of facility utilization.
That's correct. So let me clarify. After we've received all the information from district stakeholders across the district, and that would be parents, students, all the different people that will compile that information and make a determination what the community wants for a configuration. They're going to tell us we think we should be grades K-6 and 7-8 and 9-12, or some other combination of grades or buildings. And then the facility utilization is, then you start to study which buildings best fit that configuration. That has to take place. We could do that earlier, but we'd rather do it at that point.
Well, I'm sure you've given this a lot more thought than I have. I just was kind of, I thought that maybe we would take a look at the footprint of the district, or what buildings we would have, before we decided on how we would have to configure it.
That's part of the process, and as part of exercise, I don't have it in front of me, and you're not going to be able to see it, but it's a very large district map with the children and where they are. In the exercise, we use little game pieces, for instance, to represent children, and then we say we're going to lose this many children. We take them off. Those kind of things that give people a visual of what our district will look like, and then they can start to do their work and taking a look at, so where should our buildings be, which buildings should they be, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Albrecht, you know from previous conversations that I'm very concerned about our employees and how the buildings mix into being able to treat our employees fairly. It seems to me by observation that what needs to be done as far as building closures, because we're at 60 and less %. It seems to me that if that work were done earlier, then we would solve a lot of our financial problems and be able to treat our employees more fairly than we have. My question is why does this process always seem to be later or at the end?
Can I just do a timeout here? John's plan is just to give you his thinking over the 90 days. These questions that you have and you've both shared about the nature of the plan are really questions that you should have when those come up. Okay, this was just to get an overview. What I don't want you to get into here is district business, which is how are you going to configure schools and so on. If this can be a quick response, that's okay, and then we'll move on. But this is just his overview, not a, you're going to discuss all of these things at some depth as a board, and you're going to ask those questions, Fred. So is there a sort of quick response to that, John, or no?
It makes sense right now simply because, actually for the point you made, we were able to make a good effort to do something with our employees this last summer. Funding the November 2018 election cycle could help us, and so redesigning our configuration, closing buildings, and using possible revenue from that election cycle could help us get us in the same position that we were in this summer and continue to do what we did.
Okay, thanks. So, John, in your first interview, you mentioned answer to one of the questions was that you've grown quite a bit in the last 3 years. You mentioned that in your closing comments. Could you be more specific in sharing what that growth has been?
Yeah, and I'm gonna actually use a little bit of, well, not a little bit, it's a pretty important example. So a number of years ago, we had a pretty significant conflict situation that happened in the district. And the role I had at the time put me in a place that I was quite uncomfortable. And quite honestly, and I don't want to point any fingers, but there were situations that caused me to respond in ways that I wish I never would have. And so what had happened was that when that was over with, and I wanted to get back to having relationships with the people that I worked with, that I cared so much about, I wasn't very successful. I was trying hard to build bridges, and that's why I made the comment that I was thinking about resigning 6 years ago. And some people talked me into staying. 3 years ago, when the superintendency changed, I had an opportunity because we just had a change in mindset in the district that my efforts for continuing to work to build those bridges and repair the things that I had made bad for myself, I was able to do that. So in the process of facilitating collaborative efforts and being able to meet with people and allowing them to grow, I was able, and I also went on to say last time that I want some time. I'm hoping that I have this opportunity because I can continue to build those relationships. I haven't got all the way back to where I want to be, and I know that. But I created the situation myself, and I got to keep working at it. So that was the area that I needed to grow in, is relationship building with the people that I work with, and I've been able to do that under the most recent leadership because we established a growth mindset in it, and it helped.
I have a question. Just piggybacking off of what you just said, so in a superintendent role, do you think that you would be able to repair the relationships
Yes, I do. I've worked at it consistently for 6 years. It took a while. I know that that some of that past stuff is hung on for a while, but the last 3 years, people have been more open to me. I've been able to be more positive and build on my own positivity, and I keep working at it. I believe I can, yes.
So the next question, I think you've sort of touched on.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure, go ahead, Sally.
In following up on your statement, you had mentioned it was a change of leadership. Could you give any examples of how you feel the change in leadership gave you new tools to use?
Probably the best way to explain that was I was just able to change the way that I acted and behaved. Was able to be who I am, if that answers the question.
So in your last interview, last Thursday, you mentioned a couple of times in your interview that you considered resigning from your position, but decided against it. And I think you've just a bit touched upon the circumstances. Is there anything else that you could share that would add light to that?
Not really, but and I will re-emphasize this. It was my own sense of frustration in that I wasn't making enough progress in developing better relationships with people that I worked with. That was why I was considering resigning, because that was just important to me, and I was concerned that maybe just my own presence in the district wasn't helpful, and that's what I was up against. But a couple of my friends convinced me otherwise. Said if I keep working at it, it'll improve, and it has.
The next couple of questions are about communication. Listening involves hearing the speaker and understanding the speaker's point of view. Could you describe specifically how you do this?
Well, so first of all, I believe communication's a two-way street, and if I'm the speaker, I own both of them. So I have to own what the listener is hearing. So if I'm a listener, I own what I'm listening to. And I think it's really important to ask clarifying questions every single time. I think it's important to do that, because otherwise you might walk away with a misunderstanding of what actually was communicated. Now, I don't want to speak that people listening to me ought to ask follow-up questions all the time, because I don't really know that's important. But when I speak, I want people to know that I'm thinking about what they're listening to as much as what I'm saying, because I don't want people to walk away with a misunderstanding. And that's why I feel I own both parts of it, even though there is a second person.
Other than asking clarifying questions, are there other skills that you bring into play there?
Well, I think it's just conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to be clarifying questions, but having further conversations about what the speaker is saying, if you have an opportunity to do that. If it's a formal speech, that's not quite that easy to do, but it's important. As a listener, you have to be an active listener, so that's why I'm
Okay, so active listening is another thing.
active listening,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. Collaborative leaders involve the thinking of others. Under what circumstances do you, as the leader, have to make a decision?
Well, yeah, so there's a lot of different levels. This is one of the things that I learned in the last 3 years. There's a lot of different levels of decision-making, and there are those that have to be made unilaterally by the leader. There's others that the second level would be decisions are made with input from others. A third would be a collaborative or a consensus level. And then there are times when people can make decisions on their own, maybe with information from me or input from me. And I'm always thinking about a teacher in a classroom, for instance. This is level 5, where they're making decisions on their own without input from anybody else. It's based on their skill sets, they can make decisions about in real time what they need to do with their classes and their students. So there are going to be times, an example might be I'm driving around at 3:30 in the morning and I have to decide to close schools. That would be a unilateral decision. Generally, though, most of the work in schools requires collaborative work and input from other people. I think about the 12 directors in educational services whenever we're talking about anything related to instruction. I need their input because they have expertise. Seth Wenzel, for instance, his technology expertise far exceeds mine. I need his input. The same is true with Aaron Boffman and curriculum. That's his area of expertise, so I need their input. I might make a decision with their input, or I might make a decision as part of a collaborative effort and consensus making.
One of the questions that came up by the board about collaboration, because we've talked a lot about collaboration. You did. A lot of questions were asked about the collaborative spirit. So the question that sort of came up was, okay, so you get the input of others and everybody's involved in the decision making and it goes on and on and on. When do you decide that we've heard enough and it's time to make a decision if people aren't in agreement?
So that's a good point. So I think in the beginning you have to establish, first of all, what the decision process is going to look like. So is it going to be my decision with input from other people? And typically we would establish what it will take to get us to that point. And I'll go back to a committee that we put together related to a little over $1 million in at-risk money. We started with the idea that we were going to need to have several meetings to discuss this. There were 50 people, 2 groups of 25 that came from different levels of the school district, so some from elementary, some from secondary. So we had to have meetings that accommodated their schedules. And we made the determination in the beginning that we would make a recommendation to Cabinet. So that group decided what its recommendation would be after we exhausted. And we thought it would take 5 meetings, it ended up taking 3. But we usually decide in advance at what point you're going to make that decision. As a leader, those kind of, you start with how often you're going to meet and whether you need it. Is it a 10-minute meeting? We're going to get this done in 10 minutes. I'm thinking about Cabinet, for instance. We bring problems to Cabinet and we'll ask how long do we need? We need 20 minutes. We're going to make a decision in 20 minutes. And so the idea is, and if I were facilitating a group with these 7 people, I'd make sure that I hear from all 7 before a final decision was made. So you might sit there and might not offer input and the other 6 people have. I'm still going to stop and say, Ms. Madison, do you have I haven't heard from you yet, and give you an opportunity to speak.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So you talked about, the question was about a collaborative leader, but to be an effective leader, because leadership is what keeps coming up. To be an effective leader, you have to have trust. So, with the concerns that you mentioned above about trying to rebuild relationships, trust would play an important role in that. So what do you feel that you can do to regain the trust for those that you feel that you still need to build relationships with?
I have to keep doing what I've been doing. So I'm going to go back to that committee that I put together with related to at-risk dollars. We certainly felt that was going to go in a much different direction than it did in the end. But when someone's voice spoke with an idea, their idea was actually what we adopted, and it put us in a different place. The way you build that trust is you let that voice actually take place. Now, there's a difference between a veto, and just being able to come to consensus. So you have to give everybody a chance, and you have to be, I would be working to make sure that they understood it didn't really matter what your input was, it's valued, because it informs the process.
John, could you tell us about what training you've had in conflict management and consensus building?
Had a lot in the cafeteria.
That's good.
I really haven't had any formal training. It's mostly life experience. But again, I like to think that we need to be proactive in conflict management by establishing up front the mores and the ways that we're going to operate as we talk with each other. So how are we going to proceed through this, whatever it is, this collaborative process, to make sure that everybody has voice and everybody has an opportunity to have voice, and we all understand how we're going to treat each other in that process. Given that, conflict resolution or managing conflict means that you have to be very, very open and listen to everything. Typically, I would, if I had two adults, for instance, I would listen to them separately, go back and have a second conversation with each one as I have a different point of view. I'd like to, how close is this to being accurate, that kind of thing. Because you will get two different points of view from two people in conflict. And then once you get to an idea of what you believe is really true, bring them back together, say, look, how do we work our way through this? And you establish some mores up front. So, and I like to think of restorative practices in particular, because one person may have been hurt by the other person. And how do we get to a point where we can mutually agree that we can go forward? And in restorative practice work, a person has to be able to say, what you said hurt me, what you said hurt the way I felt about the work that I do, not a finger pointing like you made me feel bad. I felt bad because of what you said. So it's a different way to approach things. And so if I might have been the person that said something wrong, and they've said that to me, I was thinking about me and not about them. And that's how you manage conflict. We'll get some water. You mind?
Sure, go ahead. Don't spill it. So just to follow up just a little bit on that. So you talked about how you manage conflict when individuals are at odds. What about when you're with a group, 10 people, 15 people, and you're discussing something, and you're trying to bring the group to consensus? And you've asked them all, you've let them all weigh in to the process, but they have very different points of view, and somehow you're trying to reach consensus. What do you do? Besides, take everybody out. What do you do?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't do that. I probably would go through the. First of all, I've taken notes. I've kept track of all the input. I would go back and review to make sure that I was clear and understood every single person's point of view in the room, and then I might refer back to the decision-making process and say I might have to make this decision by myself rather than consensus because we can't come to agreement. And that I would have already told the group that in the beginning. So the idea would be we're going to decide and come to consensus. In the event we can't and I have to decide, I will do that.
What's your philosophy on special education and gifted education? And the second part of that is, how does your philosophy frame your approach to working with the instructional staff?
So that's a point of emphasis for me anyway, and if I were in a superintendent's role, I probably would even have more leverage than I do now. When we wrote our instructional plan, when we wrote our vision for personalized learning and then subsequently developed the instructional plan, we intentionally did it with the thought in mind that we meant every kid. We believe it's about inclusion in the first place. And we should be thinking about inclusion all the time. Students are general education students until such time as they're determined to need some service. So when I talk about personalized learning and every student having a device, that's what I'm talking about, is that every student will have an opportunity to learn at their pace, at their rate, with challenging them as best we can based on their skill sets. My philosophy is that the last resort is that students aren't included. And that does happen from time to time, but certainly our efforts have to be to keeping students included. We have a couple programs in the district, for instance, one's at Roosevelt, one's at Franklin Middle School, they unify the school. They actually have sports teams that have gen ed and special ed students on the sports teams, and they compete together with the idea of including everybody in the process. So.
What does research tell you about the use of technology in the classroom?
So I may come from a different perspective than a lot of, I mean, it hasn't been that long ago that use of technology in the classroom was an interactive smartboard. And at the risk of sounding a little facetious, I've told this story before. This is folklore that Abraham Lincoln did his math homework with a piece of coal on the back of a shovel when he was a little boy. Somewhere along the line, we ended up with slate blackboards and chalk. Then we went to dry erase boards, and then we had interactive smart boards. And a lot of times you see an interactive smart board not used any differently than you would Abraham Lincoln and a piece of coal on the back of a shovel. When I talk about technology being integrated into instruction, I want every student to have a device in which their content is adapted to their particular skill and their particular skill set at that point in time. The feature that's in there, and I don't know if you've heard this terminology, is called gating. And my best example that I could give you, if you ever used your personal device or gone onto a computer to apply for something or to buy even movie tickets at movietickets.com, it asks you to enter your email address twice. If you enter your email address the second time incorrectly, it will let you know that and gives you an opportunity to do it again. Well, in interactive and adaptive technology for students, when they get to a particular assessment question, if they get the question right, it lets them go forward. But the gating feature, if they don't get it right, will send them back for a review of whatever it is they're learning. And the best part about that is it's instant feedback for both the student and the teacher. And I keep thinking about the days that I was in the classroom teaching. I'd assign math homework. They would bring it back the next day. I would be able to put it in the grade book the second night and then give it back to them the next day. It was 48 hours before students got real feedback. So really integrating technology is putting a device in their hands, having them connected to their content all the time, and having the gating feature built into the content. NWA testing is adaptive, so it actually zeroes in on what a student knows and doesn't know with that gating feature built into that NWA assessment.
John, tell us how you have used your knowledge of student learning and educational research to guide professional development.
So student learning is everything that matters. I mean, it's just, that's why we're in this business. It's about student achievement, student success. All the research related to professional development is that it is necessary that it be specific to a teacher at a specific time based on a skill that they wish to work on and develop, because it'll help them with their students in their class. That being said, it's very, very difficult to provide professional development for teachers in real time when they need it, when they realize they want to try something different or do something, improve upon something in their classroom. And the only way to do that, I just got done talking about personalized learning and adaptive learning for students. We do the same thing for teachers. And we're very close. In fact, we will be kicking it off next week with Edivate, and it's an online digital professional learning tool that teachers can carry with them. So if they have a personal device, computer at home, they can seek professional development specific to their instructional needs when it fits their purpose. It's critical for that. The other part is they're professional people. We have the 5D Plus professional growth instrument that we've adopted, and that is aligned with this professional development tool. So they'll be working on a growth model that's specific to them. They can personalize their professional development based on their needs.
I have a question. So going along with the professional development, other than the educational part of it, what do you feel about professional development? Because we have a changing demographics and diversity, and we deal with different children from different levels. About professional development and helping teachers to understand maybe a student that's coming from a certain lifestyle that might be different from theirs. Do you understand?
I do.
Okay.
I do, and I think that's really important. In fact, we have probably one of the best presenters of teaching with poverty in mind is one of our employees, and that's Aaron Boffman. And Aaron does that for our staffs across the district. Now, it takes a while to get to that point, but it's critical, and where I'm coming from, and this is probably where all my passion for education comes from. My first 6 years was teaching in Detroit Public Schools, and I taught students from some very difficult situations, and I'm sure that's part of what you're referring to. We have students that are have been in our office for the last 2 weeks, little guys for the last 2 weeks that probably have not had much opportunity before they're coming to us. And so it's critical for our staff to understand where our children come from. I made this comment the other day. The whole idea of being able to give a kid a personal device and they be able to be connected to their content 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter where they're at, is they may sleep in the back seat of a car. And that's a big deal.
Thank you.
The strategic plan. The strategic plan speaks to the importance of social, emotional, and behavioral needs of students and families. What has been your specific experience in this area, and how would you help our district implement the work?
So most of my experience there is kind of life experience, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Had dinner with one of my basketball players, Redford High School in Detroit. She invited me to go to her house to have dinner with her family. She had a mother, a grandmother, and 9 siblings, and her sitting at the table plus me, 13 people. All 12 of them all talking at the same time. And for the life of me, I don't understand, but they all heard each other. And it's a different place. They're coming from different experiences. But in the same way, the only chairs in the whole house were the ones we were sitting at around the table to eat. Very sparse setting, difficult scenario. But in interacting with the same children at school, they had the same aspirations as anybody else. Their mother and their grandmother had the same desires for their children as anybody else in a suburb or, whatever. I mean, it was the same. They cared. They wanted something special for their children. Knowing that and having that experience, I know that the most important thing we can do for kids is love them. That's the most important thing we can do is love our children. And when they know we care, when they're convinced that we're there for them and we're going out of our way for them, they'll run through walls for us. But that's the first thing. And in our beliefs for our instructional plan, first we believe every student can learn and succeed. Every student can learn and succeed. And that's unconditional. And then second, we believe that their social emotional learning is part of their learning. And we have to incorporate and embed it in what we do every day.
John, you know that the demographics in the district are shifting, and enrollment is declining. What are some specific strategies that you might use to reverse this trend? And what has been your experience in working with transient students?
So I'm going to ask a clarifying question. Do we want to reduce the trend in the demographics changing, or the students?
No, the demographics are shifting is just a statement.
Okay.
Okay. The question is, two statements, shifting, enrollment declining. The question is, what are some specific strategies that you might use to reverse this trend?
Okay, so, well, I would answer that specifically with the fact that we all just simply have to be as good as we can be at what we do. I'm convinced, I've made this comment multiple times to my colleagues here in the district. I believe and we do good things, I don't want to say that we don't, but if we get much more successful than we are now, we'll have people fighting to find a way to stay here. Because we're doing things that other people don't. And I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you, I know that Livonia and Plymouth Canton have individual devices for kids. If you don't do that right, you're making a mistake. We're doing it right. We're going to do this over a 4 or 5 year period of time, have total convergence, so that leadership, professional development, instruction, the technology tools, the infrastructure itself, everything comes together so that our kids can be successful. And I'll go back to that gating feature is important. And I'm going to refer to a video game, and I don't want you to think that instruction and learning is video games. But if you're playing Mario Brothers and you get past the first, you jump across that first valley and you're successful, you feel pretty good about yourself. And that's what happens with technology and this gating feature. So when a student gets something right, it tells them that. Congratulations, way to go. Instant feedback. That's a major part of it. And when we start to do that and do it right, and students are starting to have success, our graduation rates are going up, our students are performing at a higher rate. Because parents look. They look on our website. They will look to see what our test scores are. We've got to get that trend going in the other direction, and they'll find a way to stay.
Just have one thing, because that transient student, that does concern me, because a lot of times it's family situations as well. So with this question, like, what can you do to reverse? I know you said about the technology, become more successful, but like, when it comes to family situations, like, you know, for instance, Westland has a ton of apartment buildings. Like, do you have any plans to strategically figure out a way to keep some of the families here that tend to move a lot?
Well, I think we have to take a role in that. And it's a little bit, that probably sounds like a significant challenge for a lot of our employees. We're going to like, what's my role in that? I can only go back to the same story I said before. It's my personal experience. I went further than teaching statistics. I had to reach out to the families. We have to take an active role in trying to help our families stay. So that might be to teach them how to manage things. And I don't have a plan for that, but I believe that can be a school's responsibility. That's why I think that if we combine that with the fact that we're far more successful, people will find ways. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay here. The other day when I spoke to everybody, I went through all of the movies that I've seen that drive my passion for being an educator. Lean on Me, Freedom Riders, Stand and Deliver, The Miracle Worker. All these were movies about educators who had an absolute belief in their kids. And all of those kids were the kids you're talking about. All of them were. But they were surrounded with negativity, but they refused to give in to it. We have that in us. We have that in us. And we can help them.
Would you, I see two things going on here. Certainly, we love our children,
I know.
and we want them to do well in life. We also have an academic achievement that we need to address. And it seems to me that we can do the second through initiatives in the classroom. But the former, we need to redevelop the concept of a school system that reaches out and tries to provide a more universal, I'm losing the word I need, a broader school experience for our students, after-school programs.
I totally agree with that. I don't believe, and I mentioned this earlier with the people that I worked with in Detroit and their families and their students. Our families have the same aspirations and dreams for their kids that we had for ours, or that our parents had for us. They're not any different. So we have to find ways to partner with them. And I mean, in every way, shape, or form that we can. We have to find, because they care, and we need to know that they need to know that we know they care, and partner with them, and work to help them work with us so that their children can be successful. And that's no easy task. That's work. It is work. We just can't. I don't want to use a clock to talk about it, but I'm not done until I'm done, and that means that I got to keep working to try to find ways to help people stay here, be part of their child's education, and provide programming that will keep the kids in school.
The word I was searching for was comprehensive.
Mhm.
We need to reinvest in that concept.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think of when I was a child, and I know that was just a couple of years ago, but that existed in those days. It did. Just everybody understood it, took everybody. And I don't know how we got away from it, but I work at that every single day with parents, trying to find ways to partner with them. For crying out loud, they're our customers, and we've got to find ways to meet their needs.
John, if you were the superintendent and the leader of the district, how would you feel strongly about this, obviously, how would you communicate that to staff in the district?
I do it all the time. I do it all the time. And sometimes, and I'm going to be honest, what they hear is not what I said. I was actually speaking with the staff of one of our schools last year, and I talked about how critical it is for us to interact emotionally with kids every day. High five them, hug them, whatever it is. Just some way interact with them emotionally every day, because that's what gets you to the point where they want to be there. I can't wait to get to school till I see Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so. Some of you have had the opportunity to attend the Wayne Champions Banquet or the Glenn Scholars Banquet. You've heard some really meaningful, emotional stories of student success because of what the relationships that adults developed with those students. Those are the kind of things we have to do. We have to go beyond what our normal routine or normal job is in order to make that happen. How do we have programming that happens when it's at a time that helps families and helps students feel like they belong?
So at the start of the story, you said you were just talking to a staff and you think they took it the wrong way. How
Okay,
did they
good.
take it?
Well,
That's what you
not long after that, got back to me. One of them made the comment that John thinks all we got to do is hug them and they'll do really good. That isn't what I meant, but it's certainly an important part of it.
Lots of talk about the need for a bond in the district, and asking the community to support a bond issue is part of the strategic plan. So what role have you played in passing a funding initiative in the past, and how would you approach the task now?
My experience there is not extensive. I've campaigned for 2 sinking fund bonds here, and when I say campaign, I mean it mattered to me, so I spent a lot of time in the community talking to people that I knew and about those kind of things. I did the same thing in Detroit, major bond issue in Detroit when I was a teacher there, campaigned for that one there. So I haven't had extensive work there, but quite honestly, what I do know about bond work, usually you have to have significant amount of professional guidance in that process from people with that experience.
Can you give some examples when you have developed business partnerships that have supported student success?
I can. The best ones, and they're not really big, but the best ones were that I had relationships with both Wayne and Westland Rotaries. I was a member of Wayne Rotary when I was a principal. I'm currently a member of Westland Rotary. In the Wayne situation, I approached Wayne Rotary for some funding to help us with our teen courts at Wayne Memorial High School. And the Wayne Rotary people provided the funding to buy the materials for that classroom to be built at Wayne High. In the Westland Rotary, more recently, we had some students that qualified for international competition for DECA in Anaheim, California, and typically the DECA group paid for any of those trips out of the school store account, but the school store didn't have as successful a year as normal, and they needed some additional funding to make that trip. I went to the Westland Rotary and asked them, and they gave us $1,000 toward that, and they were able to go because they made up the difference.
Describe any roles that you've played in formulating education policy at either the local, state, or national level.
So, because that's typically a superintendent's role, I haven't done a lot, but I have relationships with Bob Kosowski that goes all the way back to when he was a young man and a Little League basketball referee, and I was a coach. Bob and I have known each other for a long time. We're still close. I talk with him. I used to talk with Richard LeBlanc when he was our state representative about school policy and funding. So that's part of my 90-day plan to develop that better so that I can have a greater impact on that. Again, superintendent is the face and voice for public education in their school district, and I would take that role seriously.
So reflect on, this next question is about a situation that you might not have handled as well as you might have liked, okay?
Yeah, I've had a couple of those.
I'm sure you never had this in your career. So think about an example of a sort of complex situation that you might not have handled effectively. It doesn't have to be in your current job. It can be in any position you had. In reflection about the situation, what could you have done differently? Explain the situation and then talk about what you could have done differently, what you learned from it.
In generality, typically, and everybody experiences this one time or another in their life, often people will find themselves in a situation where they want to get something solved quickly, and that that desire to get it done quickly kind of puts you in a bad spot. The key to doing things right is to have the patience to work it through and not be in a hurry. So probably the worst scenario that I found myself in was the last time we looked at restructuring our district. And I was put in a situation where I was charged with helping a committee of 25 people determine which schools were going to close and which schools weren't going to close. Some people in the community might remember the map and what was on the map, but I was kind of part of that. I needed to take a little bit more time with that work, and I didn't because I wanted to hurry up and get it done, and it certainly didn't come out well. If I had to do it over again, I would certainly make sure that the leaders of the district who expected us to do that work understood it was going to take longer. We needed to be more judicious because it didn't, I guarantee you that didn't come out right.
So it was haste makes waste kind of a thing?
Yeah, it did. And it probably didn't need to go that fast. I just had a sense it did, and so I was pushing it faster than I needed to, and I needed to listen to more people, give more people an opportunity for input, and we probably wouldn't have gone where we went.
When did you have an inkling that it was going south on you, the situation?
Second meeting, it was quick.
So you knew soon, huh?
Yeah, and I mean,
Okay.
well, yeah.
And did you think there
I
was?
mean, there were 1,000 people at them.
Did you think
in
there
an
was anything you
auditorium.
could do when you were in the second meeting and you say, I don't think this is working out? Did anything occur to you that you could do other than leave the room or whatever?
No.
Okay.
I mean, with a few more years of experience now, I probably would have said, I'm sorry, we need to start over.
Okay. All right. Got it.
It was an impossible situation.
Okay. So those of you in the room know what he's talking about. Okay. So board, I need some direction from you. We had some additional questions that were there, sort of like the bonus questions. And do you want me to go ahead and ask them?
I think you have a few more minutes, because you can have about 10 more minutes, then we'll have about 10 minutes in between the next one to take a break in between.
Okay, fine. All right.
Madam President, I have a little different view on that. We've already asked 15 questions plus the board. I don't think it's necessary to prolong it just to do it.
So let's go with how does the board feel? I'm good either way. Do you want the other questions, or are you good with the ones you have now?
I feel good. about
Yeah, everybody feels good?
everything right now.
Okay, everybody feels
Y'all
good? Yeah.
Okay, so,
I think so too.
no more questions, John, so give us
Thank you,
a,
Dr. Weaver.
give us a summation.
So,
Or, no, let me, before you give a summation, is there anything that any of the board wants to, this was your opportunity to make sure that you found out everything you needed to know from the candidates, and if somehow it wasn't reflected in a question, go ahead.
Just one thing. We're pretty certain that we're going to have to close at least one elementary and probably more than one. And I know that we've done our homework in terms of where people reside, the cost of improving these buildings, what we might save to the district by closing a building. I don't think we're going to see any appreciable change in staff when we close buildings, because we still have the same number of kids. But here's my question to you. Can this board be confident that the decision on which, if any, buildings are to be closed will be driven by the choice work?
yeah, so I want to preface what I'm going to say with this. We haven't even done some of the things that you mentioned yet. It's important that I articulate to everybody that there's nothing in a drawer somewhere that we're working on. I mean, we have a process. And so we do have an idea, I will say this, we do have an idea what it might cost per square foot to renovate or what it might cost per square foot to build. That we do know. But this choice work, I mean, and again, some people had heard me say some pretty dead-end comments in some of the meetings, is that, because I don't want to go through what I went through the last time. I want people to have input before we ever get to the point where we start to say, okay, which building, which one, and then have that conversation about which ones do we renovate and not renovate based on the configuration that we've chosen. We haven't done, you know, we're not letting that work go forward until we have a chance to talk to the community.
And that was my understanding,
Yep.
and I appreciate that. Thank
Yep.
you.
Anything else that's on any of your mind? John, sum it up.
I think you get a sense of how much I care about our school district. I think you know how much I care about our kids. I think I've articulated how much I care about the people that do the work in our district. There's a reason I put that organizational chart in this presentation today. It's not just something that I thought up for the heck of it. It's what I believe. The work happens in classrooms. Our focus has to be on that. We have to make decisions based on what makes that happen. Whether it's an infrastructure and configuration and the savings that come from that, whether it's a bond issue that provides us with the funding that allows us to free up other dollars in the general fund to keep doing what we do for our employees. All of those things are about what happens in classrooms. That's what our decisions have to be made for. We have to think about every child, not just the ones that live on the west side of town or just the ones that live on the south side of town, not just the ones that can learn at a high rate of speed in the gifted program, but every single child. We got to find a way to include, and we will find a way to include every child in what we do in this district. It'll be the last thing I do. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Albrecht. Marlene, can I see you when you get through getting him settled? Once you get him settled.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, good job.
Are we in break, Sean?
Yes. Yes, we're gonna take a break in between the next candidate. So you can stretch, do what you need to do.